This is part 4 of the Psychoacoustics series. Check the full playlist here. To recap, check the description for corrections and an index to the video. Headphones are necessary for many of these illusions, and be ready to turn the volume down. Speech to song illusion. This illusion, if it should really be called that, refers to the way that repeated speech can sometimes seem as if it is musical. It's a provocative illusion that seems to hint at the overlap between how our brains process language and music. Consider this sentence. Given enough repetitions of this section, you may start to hear a melody coming through. Given enough repetitions of this section, you may start to hear a melody coming through. Given enough repetitions of this section, you may start to hear a melody coming through. Given enough repetitions of this section, you may start to hear a melody coming through. Given enough repetitions of this section, you may start to hear a melody coming through. Given enough repetitions of this section, you may start to hear a melody coming through. Given enough repetitions of this section, you may start to hear a melody coming through. Given enough repetitions of this section, you may start to hear a melody coming through. Perhaps our brains just want to slot the tones we hear into some kind of musical structure. Certainly the pitches in this speech sample are not perfectly centered on musical notes. But if our brains have been trained to interpret pitches as music, it may be natural for us to start interpreting speech sounds through that lens. YouTuber Charles Cornell has made an art form out of reharmonizing spoken words as music. Check out some of his piano meme compilations if you haven't already. I hope Diana Deutsch is proud. Mysterious melody effect. Deutsch also crafted this illusion. You take a common melody someone is likely to know and scramble the notes up and down octaves. The notes are still timed the same, and they are the same notes, just displaced up or down an octave or 3. See if you can guess which melody this is. Here's the melody in its normal form. It's no surprise if you had trouble identifying it when it was scrambled. After all, it doesn't sound like its normal self at all. The interesting bit comes when you listen to the scrambled version again, this time knowing what the melody is. Most of us can now hear the melody in what previously sounded like a relatively random assortment of notes, again demonstrating how directed or intentional listening can dramatically inform perception. Yanny, laurel. You may have been caught up in the furor during the great Yanny-Laurel Wars of 2018. This innocuous-seeming recording sounded to some people like Laurel and to some degenerates like Yanny. Before you take up arms against the other side, though, let's look at the psychoacoustics that explain the discrepancy. Firstly, the audio can be tweaked to sound like either. Here's the original.
Laurel, 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 laurel.
Here's a strongly Laurel version.
Laurel, laurel, laurel.
Here's the Yanny version.
Yanny, Yanny, Yanny.
Part of the explanation for the differences in opinion on this come down to the speakers or headphones that are used to play the audio, which can vary wildly in quality and affect the outcome. It also depends on which frequencies the listener is paying attention to. As other illusions in this series have demonstrated, the human auditory system is quite capable of fooling itself. Further confounding the pseudo-research done across social media, the audio was frequently re-encoded over and over, degrading it and adding or removing frequencies. In the end, whether you're one of the pitiable souls who hears Yanny, or whether you perceive it for what it in fact is, a recording of an opera singer reading the word laurel for vocabulary.com, I think we can agree that there is no point in taking sides in something so petty. Diplacusis. Diplacusis is a hearing disorder that causes a person to perceive an identical pitch differently in one ear compared to the other. If they hear this pitch in one ear, it might be perceived as this pitch in the other ear. Sometimes this happens as the result of trauma to the ears, but not always. While we should have sympathy for people that have diplacusis, we can also appreciate the interesting insight it offers into pitch perception. Our ears are imperfect instruments. Is the red you see the same as the red that I see? Is the pitch you hear the same as the pitch that I hear? Is the pitch you hear even the same pitch that you heard 20 years ago? It may be comforting to believe that what we perceive of the world is an honest representation of that world, but of course the truth is that our instruments of perception shape that representation tremendously. Sound-induced flash illusion. Be advised that the screen will do some flashing in the next few seconds, so if you're sensitive to that, hit pause or look away. Watch the screen and listen. How many times did you see the circle appear when the rapid double beeps began at the end? Many people will believe that the circle is appearing twice, once for each beat. In fact, it appeared only once. Discovered in the year 2000, this illusion is interesting in that it spans different senses. There aren't a lot of audio illusions that do that. The McGuire effect covered in this series is another interesting example. Okay, no more flashing for now. Talking piano. When I was a child, before I played any music at all, I used to play on our family piano. My siblings and I would pretend that the low notes were thunder and the high notes were lightning. I somehow developed a crazy notion that if you could play the keys of a piano fast enough, you could make any sound in the world. As I got older, I realized how foolish I had been, and would laugh at myself when I told the story to friends. And then this happened. As I got older, I realized how foolish I had been, and would laugh at myself when I told the story to friends. As I got older, I realized how foolish I had been, and would laugh at myself when I told the story to friends. As I got older, I realized how foolish I had been, and would laugh at myself when I told the story to friends. As I got older, I realized how foolish I had been, and would laugh at myself when I told the story to friends. As I got older, I realized how foolish I had been, and would laugh at myself when I told the story to friends. You may have seen this going around. You can try it yourself if you're handy with MIDI files. There's a link in the description to a converter. They basically take an input signal, analyze the frequency spectrum, and translate that spectrum into a series of rapid key presses that roughly approximate that spectrum in a piano. Because pianos have an extremely wide range, surpassed only by pipe organs, they are well suited to the task.
As I got older, I realized how foolish I had been, and would laugh at myself when I told the story to friends.
I will also link in the description to an artist that wired up a real piano to create this effect. You should check it out, not only to prove my childhood self right, but because it's just an incredible thing to hear a piano speaking. Dichotic pitch and Huggins pitch. If you present the same sound to both ears but change one characteristic of it, it can sometimes be perceived as having a pitch that it does not have. There is a specific version of this dichotic pitch, known as the Huggins pitch. Here is white noise, limited to a maximum of about 2 kHz. Don't turn up the volume. This one is supposed to be listened to at a quiet level. You may need to be in a quiet place to even perceive this. The same signal is going to both ears. Now the phase of a narrow band of frequencies centered at 225 Hz is adjusted only in one ear. See if you perceive a pitch. Kubovy cutting McGuire effect. I named this one myself because I don't think it has a common name. In a 1974 paper, these researchers generated a series of tones. They presented these tones to both ears, but instead of playing them one at a time, they played the combination of all of the tones at once, with a constant and small time delay on one side. So each tone was out of phase to some degree with the correlating tone in the other ear. They then switched the relative phase relationship of one tone at a time and found that this switching caused a pitch to be perceived. See if you can hear the major scale melody in this. Levitin effect. Ever wake up with a song in your head, or find yourself singing one? If you haven't tried it already, the next time it happens, check the pitch you're remembering against a recording of the music. If they match, you have just experienced the Levitin effect, which posits that even people without musical training remember music in the actual key more often than mere chance would suggest. I do not have perfect pitch at all, not even close, but most of the time I dream of music, I dream in a concert key. And if a song pops into my head as I'm waking up, it's almost always in tune. If you're not able to get a recording of the song in question, maybe make a little voice memo and check it out later. It's a fun game you and your subconscious brain can play together. An interesting couple of studies in 2001 and 2002 surveyed a small group of people in the Netherlands and found that the pitches that they produced during excited speech exhibited a bias towards the notes of the C major scale. So maybe those studies and the Levitin effect mean some of us non-perfect pitch people have some vestigial absolute pitch memory hidden somewhere deep inside us. Precedence and Clifton effects. The general reverberance precedence effect is how we hear a coherent sound in a reverberant room. My voice is now placed off to one side and is surrounded by echoes of itself. It may be distracting, but you are still able to understand what I'm saying because your brain pays attention to the first sounds it hears and is able to ignore the rest. Recording engineers are used to this phenomenon. When you listen back to a recording made in a room, it often sounds much more reverberant than it did when you were there. Maybe you've noticed this if you have ever recorded a voice memo in a very reverberant space. It sounds clear when you record it, but the recording itself is awash with reverb. This is because the brain is no longer receiving the same audio cues in the same way, and so it has a harder time untangling all the various signals it receives. The Clifton effect is a related phenomenon where the brain ignores so-called implausible reflections. Reflections that are especially late or otherwise unnatural are not perceived as relevant to the localization of the sound. The Franssen effect. This effect only works with loudspeakers. If you are wearing headphones, try this one again when you can listen on stereo loudspeakers. A single loudspeaker like the popular portable devices or a cell phone speaker will not work. Our ears can be tricked about the location of a sound another way. I'll play a tone. Point in the direction of the tone and keep pointing until you hear 3 quick beeps. The 3 quick beeps will be the actual location of the tone at the end of the test. Were you pointing the wrong way? The tone did start over here, but then it faded out, and at the same time, a new tone faded in on the other side. Our brains are sensitive to the onset of the sound when it comes to localization, and absent any other clues, it has a hard time letting go of this impression. Here it is again, this time going in the other direction. Thanks for watching. Part 5 will be coming out pretty soon, so stay tuned. A big thanks to my Patreon patrons that are helping to keep this channel going. You'd of course be more than welcome to join them. There's a link down below. If you'd like to make a one-time donation to help support the channel, there's also a link for that. And head over to my second channel if you'd like to see a variety of different sorts of videos over there.